That's cool. I'll check that out. Where's the blue tape?
It's not going to work.
Got blue tape on it. I know there's a joke in there somewhere about making a small book turn into 3 movies, right?
We'll call the meeting of the special meeting of the Amherst City Council to order on December 17th, 2018 at 7 p.m. Roll call, please.
Mr. Cowger?
Here.
Mr. Winarski?
Here.
Mr. Nahorn?
Present.
Mr. Miller?
Present.
Mr. Janik?
Here.
Mr. Van Churen?
Here.
Mr. Dembinski?
Here.
Now, will you please stand while we're led in prayer by Chaplain Nahorn and the pledge to the flag by Sergeant at Arms Dembinski.
Please join me in bowing your heads. Gracious God, we meet one last time as a council this year during this special meeting to make final decisions on items before the new year. Let us continue to make the best decisions for the citizens and our town as we move forward. And now let the words of our mouths and meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your vision. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We'll go to item 4 on the agenda, ordinances and resolutions, second reading. Item 4A, please.
An ordinance providing for the issuance and sale of bonds in a maximum principal amount of $2,560,000 for the purpose of paying costs of improving city streets by reconstructing, resurfacing, grading, draining, curbing, paving, constructing storm sewers and related drainage facilities, and making other improvements as designated in the plans approved or to be approved by council, and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Winarski.
I'd like to suspend council rules so this can be passed on the second reading.
Mr. Van Churen. There's a motion and a second to suspend the rule requiring 3 readings so that item 4A can be passed on the second reading. Comments or questions? Seeing none, roll call vote, please.
Mr. Cowger?
Yes.
Mr. Winarski?
Yes.
Mr. Nahorn?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Mr. Van Churen?
Yes.
Mr. Dembinski?
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0. Mr. Janik.
Move to adopt.
Mr. Dembinski.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to adopt. Comments or questions? Seeing none, roll call vote, please.
Mr. Cowger?
Yes.
Mr. Winarski?
Yes.
Mr. Nahorn?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Mr. Van Churen?
Yes.
Mr. Dembinski?
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0.
You'll be ordinance 01842.
We'll go to item 4B, please.
An ordinance providing for the issuance and sale of bonds in a maximum principal amount of $515,000 for the purpose of paying costs of installing and improving sidewalks and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Winarski.
Motion to suspend council rules so this can be passed on the second reading.
Mr. Dembinski.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to suspend the rule that requires 3 readings so that item 4B can be adopted on the second reading. Comments or questions? Seeing none, roll call vote, please.
Mr. Cowger?
Yes.
Mr. Winarski?
Yes.
Mr. Nahorn?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Mr. Van Churen? Mr. Dembinski?
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0. That rule is suspended. Mr. Winarski.
Motion to adopt.
Mr. Dembinski.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to adopt. Comments or questions? Seeing none, roll call vote, please.
Mr. Cowger?
Yes.
Mr. Winarski?
Yes.
Mr. Nahorn?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Mr. Van Churen?
Yes.
Mr. Dembinski?
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0. Item 4B is adopted.
It'll be ordinance 01843.
We will go to item 4C, please.
An ordinance providing for the issuance and sale of bonds in a maximum principal amount of $1,015,000 for the purpose of paying costs of improving Cooper Foster Park Road from State Route 58 to Oberlin Avenue by widening, reconstructing, resurfacing, grading, draining, curbing, paving, constructing storm sewers and related drainage facilities, and making other improvements as designated in the plans approved or to be approved by council and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Winarski?
Motion to suspend council rules so this can be adopted on the second reading.
Mr. Dembinski?
Second.
There's a motion and a second to suspend the rule that requires 3 readings so that this item can be adopted on the second reading. Comments or questions, please? Seeing none, roll call vote, please.
Mr. Cowger?
Yes.
Mr. Winarski?
Yes.
Mr. Nahorn?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Mr. Van Turen? Mr. Dembinski?
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0. That rule is suspended. Mr. Winarski?
Motion to adopt.
Mr. Janik?
Second?
There's a motion and a second to adopt. Comments or questions? Seeing none, roll call vote, please.
Mr. Cowger?
Yes.
Mr. Winarski?
Yes.
Mr. Nahorn?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Mr. Van Turen? Mr. Dembinski?
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0. That item 4C is adopted.
You'll be ordinance 01844.
We'll go to item 4D, please.
An ordinance providing for the issuance and sale of bonds in a maximum principal amount of $1,025,000 for the purpose of refunding for debt charges saving certain of the city's outstanding various purpose bonds, Series 2006, dated March 15, 2006, and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Winarski?
Suspend council rules so this can be adopted on the second reading.
Mr. Dembinski?
Second.
There's a motion and a second to suspend the rule that requires 3 readings so that this item 4D can be adopted on the second reading. Comments or questions? Seeing none, roll call vote, please.
Mr. Cowger?
Yes.
Mr. Winarski?
Yes.
Mr. Nahorn?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Mr. Van Turen? Mr. Dembinski?
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0. That rule is suspended. Mr. Winarski?
Motion to adopt.
Mr. Dembinski?
Second.
There's a motion and a second to adopt item 4D. Comments or questions? Seeing none, roll call vote, please.
Mr. Cowger?
Yes.
Mr. Winarski?
Yes.
Mr. Nahorn?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Mr. Van Turen? Mr. Dembinski?
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0. Item 4D is adopted.
It'll be ordinance 01845.
We will go on to item 4E.
An ordinance approving and accepting the dedicated improvements for the preserve at Quarry Lakes subdivision number 3.
Mr. Winarski?
Suspend council rules so this can be adopted on the second reading.
Mr. Miller?
Second, please.
There's a motion and a second to suspend the rule that requires 3 readings so that this can be adopted on the second reading. You wish to comment, Mr. Miller?
Yes, thank you, Madam President. I just wanted to, once again, since you're in the audience, thank Mr. Brady and Mr. Campana for their investment in Amherst. And it's been a continual investment. I hope it continues in the future as well, past this Quarry Lake subdivision and so forth. I wish you best of luck and hope to keep hearing good things. Thank you. No further questions or comments.
Any further comments or questions? Seeing none, roll call vote.
Mr. Cowger?
Yes.
Mr. Winarski?
Yes.
Mr. Nahorn?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Mr. Van Turen?
Yes.
Mr. Dembinski?
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0. The rule requiring 3 readings is suspended. Mr. Winarski?
Motion to adopt.
Mr. Dembinski?
Second.
There's a motion and a second to adopt item 4E. Comments or questions? Seeing none, roll call vote, please.
Mr. Cowger?
Yes.
Mr. Winarski?
Yes.
Mr. Nahorn?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Mr. Van Turen?
Yes.
Mr. Dembinski?
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0. Item 4E is adopted.
It'll be ordinance 01846.
We will go on to item 5, ordinances and resolutions, third reading. Item 5A, please.
An ordinance establishing the salaries and benefits of the permanent part-time tax assistant 1 and setting the pay rate, terms, and other conditions of employment, and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Dembinski,
Move to adopt.
Mr. Winarski,
I'll second with the question, if I can please.
just a minute, just a moment. There's a motion and a second to adopt item 5A. Mr. Winarski.
Thank you. A quick question for you. Adopting this in the third reading, doesn't that put that out 30 days after the mayor's signature? Is there anything we want to do to, or is it, can you begin the process right away?
If it has emergency on it, it'll be law tomorrow.
Okay, just want to verify. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Any further comments or questions? Seeing none, roll call vote, please.
Mr. Cowger?
Yes.
Mr. Winarski?
Yes.
Mr. Nahorn?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Mr. Van Turen?
Yes.
Mr. Dembinski?
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0. Item 5A is adopted.
Will be ordinance 01847.
We'll go to item 5B, please.
An ordinance approving and accepting the dedicated improvements for the reserve at Beaver Creek subdivision phases 1 and 2, and approving the subdivision plats therefore.
Mr. Dembinski.
Move to adopt.
Mr. Nahorn.
Second with comment, please.
Okay, just a moment. There is a motion and a second to adopt item 5B. Mr. Nahorn.
Just briefly, I had a few questions about some stormwater facilities on the property there, and was in contact with Mr. Brady, and we had set up a meeting. Really appreciate the promptness on that, and because I know in the past of how they've been taking care of any issues that have arisen, I have full confidence that any questions will be answered and that'll be all taken care of. So I have full confidence in supporting this item. Thank you.
Thank you. Further comments or questions? Seeing none, roll call vote, please.
Mr. Cowger?
Yes.
Mr. Winarski? Mr. Nahorn?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Mr. Van Turen?
Yes.
Mr. Dembinski?
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0. Item 5B is adopted.
It'll be ordinance 01848.
Thank you. Mr. Winarski.
Motion to adjourn.
Mr. Miller.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Motion passes 7-0. We are adjourned at 7:13. Thank you very much, Joe.
Thank you so much.